Welcome once again to Dialogue on Public Issues. I'm John Chowning with Campbellsville University. Today we continue in our series of interviews with candidates in the November 5th general election. Very honored today to be hosting our incumbent Republican governor, the Honorable Matt Bevin. All candidates, as I've been saying in all of our interviews, have been invited to these series of interviews. Governor Bevin, welcome, sir.
Great to be back with you, it really is.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. I think most people that'll be watching are familiar with you, but just in case.
I'm amazed at how often people are still surprised at times by little tidbits, so I'll give you the 30,000-foot view. I was raised in a family of 8. I was the second of 6 children. My dad did a variety of different jobs, but most of my life worked in a little wood mill. My mom was primarily a stay-at-home mom. As we got older, she worked part-time every now and then, just doing things. But we raised crops and animals. Pretty much everything we ate, we raised it or grew it. 4-H was my social life as a kid. It was literally my only social life. First time I ever flew in an airplane, I was 17 years old, and it was a trip that I won through 4-H. I was able to go to college, but had to pay 100% of it myself. Graduated from Washington and Lee University, and went off to the military. Was an active duty military officer. And that was the first time in my life. Actually, in college was the first time I ever had my own room, briefly, for a time. But growing up, I shared a bedroom with 3 brothers in a house with no shower, no TV. And so getting off to college and sharing a small room with only one person felt like an uptick. And then once I was an officer and had my own room, felt like an even better gig. Got out of the military about 26 years ago. I've been in the private sector, an entrepreneur, a business person, much of my career in the investment management world. I'm married. I have 9 children, which is surprising to some at that number, but my wife and I were blessed with 5 children. We adopted then 4 additional children. This is something very near and dear to us. And then found myself a few years ago, I wrote a letter to somebody in the faith-based community entitled, "Where are the Daniels?" You know, who are the people from among us that are willing to defy the king, either literally or figuratively, to stand in the gap and challenge the sort of apathy that had crept into American politics, where people just sort of went along with whatever was dictated seemingly from the top down. And I had never been in politics. I'd never run for office, never worked on a campaign, but felt that it was my duty as someone blessed to be living in the land of the free and the home of the brave to step forward. And so this is what, I never studied political science, never expected that I would be in this situation, but I'm grateful that the people of Kentucky have entrusted me with this responsibility.
Why did you decide to run for re-election? There were those who, you and I, last time we interviewed you, we laughed about those who had speculated about whether you would run or not run.
Well, here's the thing. There's much work yet to be done. People ask, is it fun to be the governor? Not particularly, no. I wish I could say that it was a hoot. It's not. It comes at a great expense of family time and of other personal interests. And you get old for a reason. People get gray and old because you find yourself attending funerals and making decisions, life and death decisions, for people that are in state care that would not normally have been on your radar screen. But I'm doing this because I love Kentucky, because I love America, because I think we're on a good trajectory. There's a lot of corruption in Frankfurt that's still systemic, and we're cleaning it out and flushing out and cleaning out that of the past, trajectory changing and moving forward into the future. New jobs, new opportunities, modernizing our tax code, saving our pensions, things we'll probably talk about. These are things that we still are at the front end of. I just want my children and grandchildren to be able to live here. I want the governor of Tennessee to wonder why their kids have to come here to get a job instead of the other way around.
You've answered this question to an extent, but let me ask it precisely. Why should the voters of Kentucky reelect you?
Again, this is a personal decision on people's part.
Sure.
And what I always tell people is, don't vote for me simply because of the party I'm in. Just because I may share the party with someone doesn't mean they should vote for me. Doesn't mean they should vote against me if they're of a different party. I ask people to vote their values and not their party. So if the value of defense of human life, I'm unapologetically and strongly pro-life. And I'm running against someone who's very strongly pro-abortion. That's a big issue for some people, and I think appropriately so. That's a value for some people. The value of our Constitution and the defense of our Constitution and the respect for it as written. including the Second Amendment and the defense of our right to keep and bear arms that shall not be infringed. That's important to some people. That is a value that they hold very dear. Economic creation and development, environments, creating of jobs. I'm the only individual in this race who's actually created a job ever that the taxpayers didn't pay for. And so these types of things, I'm a military veteran, unlike my opponent. These things matter to people. They don't make me a perfect person or even the most qualified person in Kentucky. But in this race, I believe that it makes me the most qualified, most in line with where Kentuckians are. And so what I ask people to do is decide what you care about. If you care about our country, our Constitution, our military, our law enforcement, if you care about life, you care about job creation, if these are the values that inform you, vote your values and not your party. And I think if people do that, it would afford people like myself and others that are running to be elected.
Mm-hmm. What do you think are the most important issues in this race?
Boy, I tell you, it's interesting. At the end of the day, if we don't have a strong economy, so many of the other issues that people care about, and for good reason, become a little bit moot. If a state is insolvent or a nation is insolvent, then people struggle just trying to find food and shelter and safety. Look at countries like Venezuela, what is happening. So I think it's important to never take our eye off the economy and the need for job creation. But what I hear from people care about the life issue. It literally is life and death, and people see it as such. People care about sanctuary cities and the defense of our nation's border. We're not a border state. It's surprising how topical this is, how often this comes up, how often people want to wonder why people are not standing with the president and with our nation's laws in defending our nation's borders. So those are two topics that the one life issue is not surprising. It has always been an issue in our state. The border security in sanctuary cities surprisingly has been very topical in speaking to people. So all of these things, some social, some legal, some economic, are all mixed together. The pensions, of course, and what's going to be done to save these are all things that people are talking about this election.
On the life issue, are there additional measures that you would propose to take? To working with the General Assembly, obviously, during your second term?
We've already passed, I believe, 10 different pro-life pieces of legislation, and I would like to see no abortion clinics in our state. And again, not everybody agrees on this issue, including some that will be watching this broadcast. But I strongly believe that if we can't stand for life, something that was endowed by our Creator, an inalienable right, as our founders said, something government has no right to give or take from us, if we can't stand in defense of those who don't have a voice and who are defenseless, what then is the role of government? So what would I like to see us do? More to protect and defend the voiceless, the defenseless, to protect the minority from the majority, the weak from the strong. That is the role of elected government. I take it very seriously. So there are additional things that I think will be done. And again, I don't want to get out ahead of our legislature, but there are things that we're doing to ultimately, I'd like to see Roe v. Wade overturned. I think it has been a stain on our nation's history.
Has your opponent challenged some of the pro-life legislation?
He has,
passed by
sadly.
the General Assembly?
I mean, it's interesting. I'm running against our Attorney General, which I think is probably known to people. He takes an oath of office. He's paid by the people of Kentucky and takes a sworn oath to defend the laws that are passed by our legislature and signed into law by our governor. Not only has he not done that, in some instances he has sued the very legislature and governor that passed these things into law. Rather than defending them, he's used the money he's paid to defend them, he and his 86 attorneys paid for by the taxpayers, to actually sue the taxpayers, their representatives. And not only that, but to not defend these in court and to, in fact, sometimes join with others who are in opposition. And this is just a very big misrepresentation of his responsibility.
In the context of the border issue, immigration issue, are there particular public policy stances the state could take? Obviously supporting President Trump and the federal administration. Are there other things that need to be done in Kentucky?
I think very clearly what you will see happen in this session, and I will be happy to sign into law, is that we will make clear that this state is not a sanctuary state, that we will not allow sanctuary cities within our state, and that we will not harbor people who have violated the law, whether they're citizens or non-citizens. That this will not be a place where violators of the law will be harbored. And if in fact we have laws about what it takes to become a legal immigrant to our country, then we will do everything in our power to support, come alongside the federal government and ensure that those are enforced. And if people, and this is the wonderful thing about our nation and our form of government, is if the laws are wrong, and throughout our history at times they have been, we have a mechanism to change them. And I think it's our responsibility to do so. So if the laws need to be changed, let's change them, but let's not ignore them. Apply the laws as they exist or change them to make them more appropriate.
You mentioned the public pension issue. That's one that has taken a good bit of time and attention during your first term as governor. Lots of debate, lots of debate between the legislature and different public policy groups and so forth. At this point in time and going into a second term, if you're reelected, what will continue to be the issues that remain to be addressed?
This is tops among them, I'll be honest. We need to talk about pensions. We need to talk about modernizing our tax code. We need to talk about continuing to create a vibrant economy so that we have job creation, so that there's tax revenue, so that there is the ability for infrastructure and education and expansion of things like the Heartland Parkway and whatever else. I mean, all these things are connected. Things that matter to people at the local level are dependent upon tax revenue. So all these things will matter. But back to the original question and to the pension itself, I wish we had resolved it already. 4 years ago, nobody was talking about it. Nobody now is unaware of the fact that this is a problem. People can disagree on the method to the madness for resolving it, but at the end of the day, it's purely financial. It's about money. It's about dollars and cents, and whether the money is there or not. It's about demographics. It's about actuarial science. It's about how long people live in retirement relative to how long they worked. It's about how much they put in versus how much they take out. It's whether this is sustainable or not. It's about how many people are working for everyone that's retired. And now in Kentucky, we have more retirees than we have workers. So the system is broken. How then do we fix it? These things must still be addressed by whoever the next governor is, and I intend to address it in our second term.
So do we need additional reforms as well as additional funding?
We do. I mean, structurally, we cannot continue to promise future employees the same thing we have promised current or past employees, or none of them will get it. That's the hard reality. If we promise future employees the very same type of retirement structure, then the people currently working will not get theirs, nor will those new people, and many of those retired will not either. So we need to change the structure on a going forward basis, and then that will help us to codify the exact amount of liability. Tens and tens of billions, 60 to 80 billion dollars in unfunded liability, money we owe and do not have. How are we going to pay it? Over 30 years, by forcing future governors and future legislators by law to fund that, but we can't know what that is until we change the structure on a future basis.
Governor, what do you think are the top achievements that have occurred on the pension issue during your tenure?
Awareness.
Okay.
I mean, again, I've never been a personal participant in the 12-step program, but I'm familiar with the first step is you have to acknowledge you have a problem. And the same occurs in the world of finance. When you have unfunded pension obligations, you have to acknowledge you have a problem. And our previous governors and many of our previous legislators refused to do so. It was easier to kick that can down the road. The greatest accomplishment is that this is very much in the forefront. It's on the radar screen, for better or for worse. We can't ignore it. We have had some progress. We've made some modest adjustments, including this most recent quasi-bill that affects our regional universities, public universities, health organizations, et cetera. Little incremental things, but there needs to be much more done for us to save the system.
If reelected in November, you obviously are inaugurated December 8th, I believe, if I remember my Kentucky Constitution correctly. You immediately, as you well know, begin work on a new biennial budget as the General Assembly meets in January 2020. What will be the issues on the table
some of these very things we've just been talking about.
Exactly.
We still have so many billions of unfunded liability that for us to not make the pension a priority, no matter who the next governor would be, or the governor after them, or the governor after them for the next 20 or 30 years, the top obligation is going to be to fund this liability. And it will cost billions, and it will be as big a line item as anything in the budget of necessity because it has been ignored for so long. Modernizing our tax code and how we do that to address things like death taxes and getting rid of those, inventory taxes and getting rid of those, but how then do you accommodate for the monies that would be lost in that way? How do we move from a production-based economy for taxes to a consumption-based tax economy, where we're taxing consumption rather than wealth creators, job producers, the people that create the wealth? We want more of that, and let them then disseminate that in ways that will then be taxable. So as we move to lower income and corporate taxes, so that we get more people coming here and creating jobs, the structure to make that happen will have to be discussed. Things like local option sales taxes need to be discussed. Road funds and the ability to pay for projects that are needed and that are wanted are going to have to be discussed. So taxes are going to be very topical. Adoption and foster care is something that I just am passionate about.
Right.
We fail so many even now, but I'm so grateful to this university. Campbellsville is leading this nation, frankly, certainly our state, with respect to how we take young people who might otherwise slip through the cracks and give them opportunities to pursue post-secondary education, to pursue the American dream in a loving, supportive environment. To me, this is an example for the nation. I was at the White House last week talking with them about this. I'm trying to get the president to make this a part of the next State of the Union address. I mean, he'll talk about what he wants to, but I believe it's important that if the national meets us from the bottom up, these are things where Kentucky, as we have with criminal justice reform, as we have with red tape reduction, the White House looks to Kentucky like never before for policies that matter. So all of these things you'll see incorporated into my next budget.
Do you think there is a likelihood of tax reform in this session?
Has to happen. And I'll tell you why. The toll credits, which are known certainly to people in this community and throughout the state, those tolls that once existed and the credits that accrued from when they existed are now gone. And that we've been drawing down on that for years now, and we've been using it to pull down matching dollars from the federal government. They're gone. They have to be resuscitated. They have to be rejuvenated from somewhere. And so to that end, we are going to have this conversation. There's no way around it. 2020, there's going to have to be a day of reckoning with respect to taxes and modernizing the tax code in this state. And this is an important thing. Let me digress for one quick split second. I'm running against a fellow who's promising a lot of things. Pay raises here, funding of this, funding of that, but with no concept or discussion about where the money's going to come from. The sad and harsh reality is that we already don't have enough money for the current things we have, let alone other promises that might be made. And the only solution for anything that might come in the future, infrastructure, education, law enforcement, any of the things that government has a responsibility for, the only way we get more of what we have or something different is to get more tax dollars coming in. How is that? Or how much can you take from the existing people? Or what can we do to broaden it so that more people move here and we have more taxpayers? How can we get more people to work? These are the things, again, big difference between me and my opponent. I believe able-bodied working age people with no children should go to work. We have plenty of jobs. Why should you sit home and not work while your neighbor works and feeds you and houses you and takes care of you? If you don't have dependents, well, you need to go to work in this country. Big difference. He sues me to stop me from putting able-bodied people back to work. We just disagree on a lot of things.
What's the status of your proposed Medicaid reform?
Again, it's stuck right now in a federal court by one judge in Washington, D.C., who I would lay good odds on the fact that he's probably never even been to Kentucky. And yet, he has decided that he knows what's best for Kentucky. He thinks it's good for our people not to go to work if they could. This will be challenged and overturned. Ultimately, it will be in front of the Supreme Court, and I believe we'll win. They're hoping that I'll fade away before this gets resolved. I'm hanging in there like a hair in a biscuit.
Tell us, just so the voters understand, your Medicaid reform.
Yes.
Very quickly. What does it involve?
It simply says this. in exchange for free health care, which is what Medicaid is for non-elderly people. Medicaid was initially designed for non-elderly people that were medically frail or pregnant women or children, people who had disabilities, but it is, under the previous president, Obama, was expanded to able-bodied people to allow them to get free health care at no cost. What I've said, and I'm saying this as a person who grew up in poverty, I never had health care till I was an active duty Army officer. First time I ever had health coverage in my life. So I come at this from a perspective of experience and empathy. And I know that people take care of things and value things that they have some involvement in. So what I've proposed is 5 on-ramps for a person to do something in exchange for that which their neighbors are paying for them. 1, work 4 hours a day, 5 days a week. If they're already working, they've made that, they're already done. Perfect. Or volunteer 20 hours a week, or take care of somebody that the state might otherwise be paying for 20 hours a week, or go to school 20 hours a week, or go into a training program for which there are jobs in place 20 hours a week. 5 different on-ramps. Every community has 1 or more of these available. And I don't think it's too much to ask. I know we will be better for it. Our economy will be stronger. More people will be working. Our employers will be happy to have a broader pool of applicants. Everybody wins.
Tell us about your running mate for lieutenant governor. And will your lieutenant governor have specific responsibilities during your term?
Yes, Ralph Alvarado I chose very intentionally because of some needs we have on the healthcare front in this state. He is a medical doctor. He's a state senator. He's the only medical doctor in the entire legislature out of 138 people. But he's a man who is the son of immigrants, people who came here fleeing socialism, the very same thing that people at the national level are now espousing. His parents fled socialist countries to come to America for that American dream. And they had 2 children born here, the oldest of whom is Ralph. He became a medical doctor, did his residency at UK, and has stayed here ever since. His children born here, like myself, is here by choice, loves this state. He's a man with a passion for healthcare. He's a man with a passion for liberty and freedom and for the American way and the Constitution and what that affords people. And so what I intend to have him focusing on is what can we do to help improve the health status of Kentuckians? We have a lot of need. He's already done many things, but his knowledge of the legislative process, his knowledge of medicine, and how those two must come together on hypertension, diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular disease, etc., lung disease, all these issues that we're at the bottom of the pile in, that we want to move upward and have health improvements. I'm certainly going to ask him to be focused on that very intensely in the next years ahead.
He has received a good bit of national attention, has he not, during his tenure in the state Senate?
He has, in that he's been asked twice, first by Senator Paul when he ran for president to introduce him in Louisville, and then secondly, he spoke at the Republican National Convention at the request of the president. And so on both instances, certainly he was seen and people are like, oh, who's that guy? Well, I'm proud that that guy is a Kentuckian. I'm proud of the fact that I believe he'll be our next lieutenant governor, and he'll be a tremendous asset for Kentucky.
We're already in the midst of the 2020 presidential campaign, and we haven't even gotten to our November election here in Kentucky. President Trump holding campaign rallies around the country. To what extent do you think Kentucky's race for governor, your race, will be impacted by the 2020 presidential election? In other words, to what extent will national issues impact the Kentucky governor's race?
I think the same way they always have, and in some measure it's almost the other way around. How much will this race be a bellwether for what's coming in 2020? We saw that in 15 where an outsider, a business guy, someone that was supposedly behind in every poll, somebody that nobody was for, somehow won as governor in this state. And a year later, the very same arguments, the very same type of a path brought our president into power at the national level. I think you'll see the same thing. But again, to your point, the national level issues like life and like sanctuary cities and protection of our borders, these things have crept into the discourse for this. And you're right, though, November the 5th this year, it's important for people to come out because the greatest threat to our nation is our political apathy.
Now, your race is one of only, what, 3 gubernatorial races
It is.
in the state?
And I'm the
in
only
the nation.
in the nation. There is ourselves, Mississippi and Louisiana. I'm the only Republican incumbent.
Okay.
So back to your previous question, many people at the national level would love to stick my hide to the wall as a way to show how they could scale that up and stick the president's hide to the wall. And so I'm seen as a bit of a proxy. We're not dissimilar in our views of things, our methodology. Our tweets are a little bit different. Mine are not as prolific as his. But my point is, I respect the man. I'm grateful that we have a bold leader. I'm attempting to do this in our state, and people who dislike me dislike him, and vice versa.
What's your vision? How would you articulate your vision, Governor, for Kentucky? What's the general vision you hope to pursue over the next 4 years?
In the shortest way possible, let me say this. I want Kentucky to be undisputed among states in our nation as the center for engineering and manufacturing excellence. That among all states, as surely as we think of Germany among all the nations of Europe, I want people to think of Kentucky among all the states in America as the place to engineer, to innovate, and that takes every facet of education, from the arts to the innovators, to the implementers, the engineers, to design, but from the innovation of the idea to the creation of the final product. I want this to be the epicenter in our country for engineering and manufacturing excellence. That's it. You couple around that, that's the overarching vision. That will drive the economy, the jobs, the tax base. I'm also a person who wants this to be a state that is as true to our nation's founding with respect to love for God and country, respect for values, for the sanctity of human life, for the defense of the family, by putting the interests of children first over those of political interests. And these are the kind of things that are going to help us to make our way forward strongly. And as a leader, Kentucky is leading like never before in our nation, having influence in Washington like never before. We've never had a president visit Kentucky as often as this president, a vice president as often as this vice president, cabinet secretaries as often as these have. Then why is it? Because we're a big swing state? Because we have so many electoral votes? Hardly. It's because they respect us, they appreciate us, and they're looking to emulate things that we're doing, and I think we'll continue to do this in the years ahead.
This will be the final question, and we're down just to a few moments. One of your campaign points of emphasis is the record of economic success. Articulate that as kind of your closing statement.
In the last 3.5 years, we've had job creation like never before. 55,000 plus new jobs in the last 3 years. We have the lowest unemployment we've ever had. We have more people working than ever before in Kentucky. Highest workforce participation rate. So starting to get these able-bodied people back into the workforce. These things are good for our economy. $21 billion in private capital invested. We've never in our history had a 10-year period where that much investment, let alone a 3-year period. And these dollars being invested are like seeds in the ground. In the right environment will allow them to germinate and to grow and to bear fruit for generations to come. And this is what I want to see for my children, for my grandchildren, and frankly, for the 4.5 million other people that call Kentucky home.
Governor Matt Bevin, we wish you Godspeed and safe travels out on the campaign trail.
Thank you.
And during your tenure as governor. This is John Chowning with the incumbent governor, candidate for re-election, the Honorable Matt Bevin, and thanking our viewers for being with us for Dialogue on Public Issues.